My 2 daughters left me out of my husband's will reading, so I showed them. But as I signed the acknowledgement with shaking hands, I noticed something odd about the date on the will. It was formatted differently than the documents David usually kept in his home office. The font looked wrong. Too clean. Too perfect. Have you ever felt betrayed by those closest to you? Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family, enjoy the story. The lawyer's voice droned on, but all I heard was my own erasure, 35 years of marriage reduced to nothing. Have you ever sat in a room where people discussed your life as if you weren't there? Have you felt invisible in your own story? My daughters watched me crumble, their faces masks of indifference as I lost everything I'd built. The house where I'd raised them, the lake property where we'd spent summers, the bank accounts I'd helped fill, all of it handed over like I was already dead. But what they didn't know was that I had something they'd overlooked, and it would change everything. If you've ever been pushed too far by the people who should love you most, this story will shake you to your core. Stay with me as I show you how silence became my greatest weapon, and how the smallest piece of paper can bring down the biggest lies. Have you ever discovered that your whole life was built on someone else's deception? Do you know someone who's been erased from their own family? Comment below and let me know, because what happened next changed everything I thought I knew about justice. Now, let me take you back to where it all began, in a mahogany-paneled office in Nashville, where I learned that 35 years of marriage could disappear with the stroke of a pen. The mahogany table felt cold beneath my palms as the lawyer announced I would inherit nothing from my own husband. Nothing. After 35 years of making his coffee every morning, folding his shirts, and holding his hand through 3 surgeries, I was being erased like pencil marks. My daughters sat across from me in their expensive suits, Rebecca in navy blue that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, and Jennifer in charcoal gray that matched her heart. They wouldn't meet my eyes. That should have been my first clue. The rain streaked the office windows, and I watched the drops race down the glass while Mr. Henderson read my husband's will. Each word felt like a slap. The house deed, to Rebecca. The savings account, to Jennifer. Even the little lake property in Kentucky where David and I had planned to retire, split between them like they were dividing candy. I remember thinking about the morning David died. How he'd traced his finger along my spine at dawn, whispering about the fishing dock he wanted to build at the lake house. How his hands had lingered on my waist as I poured his coffee, and how he'd said, "Donna, you're still the most beautiful woman I know." 3 hours later, his heart stopped. "Mrs. Patterson?" The lawyer's voice cut through my memory. "Do you have any questions about the distribution?" I looked at my daughters. Rebecca was checking her phone. Jennifer was staring out the window like she had somewhere better to be. These were the babies I'd nursed through fevers, the teenagers I'd waited up for on prom night, the women I'd helped through divorces and career changes. "No questions," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the rain. But as I signed the acknowledgement with shaking hands, I noticed something odd about the date on the will. It was formatted differently than the documents David usually kept in his home office. The font looked wrong. Too clean. Too perfect. Have you ever felt betrayed by those closest to you? Share your experience below, because what I discovered next would make your heart race. That night, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by every financial document David had ever kept. The man was obsessive about paperwork. He saved grocery receipts from 1987. But this will didn't match his usual style. The house felt different now that I knew I'd be losing it. Every creak seemed to whisper goodbye. The refrigerator hummed a funeral song. Even the grandfather clock in the hallway sounded like it was counting down my last days here. I pulled out David's laptop and opened the digital copy of the will that Mr. Henderson had emailed me. That's when I saw it, something that made my blood freeze. The file properties showed the document was created 3 days after David's funeral. 3 days after we'd buried him in his favorite blue tie. My hands trembled as I clicked through the metadata. Last modified, November 15th. David had died on November 12th. Either my husband had managed to write his will from beyond the grave, or someone was playing a very dangerous game. I thought about Rebecca's smirk when the lawyer mentioned the lake house. How Jennifer had suddenly started wearing expensive jewelry after the funeral. The way they'd both insisted on handling the paperwork details, while I was too emotional to think straight. The fluorescent light above the kitchen table buzzed, casting harsh shadows across the documents. I grabbed my phone and Googled will forgery signs. What I found made me sick to my stomach. Inconsistent formatting. Digital creation dates after death. Changes to font styles. Every article I read described exactly what I was looking at. By 3 a.m., I had filled a legal pad with notes. David's real will, if it existed, was somewhere else. And my daughters knew about it. They had to know. I made 2 phone calls that changed my life forever. The first was to my sister Linda in Memphis, asking for the name of that retired paralegal she'd mentioned at Christmas. The second was to a number I found online, a digital forensics company in Atlanta. What would you do if you suspected your family was lying to you? Fight back or walk away? Let me know in the comments, because my next decision would either save me or destroy what was left of my family forever. Margaret Winters had steel-gray hair and eyes that could see through lies. We met at a coffee shop in Memphis 3 days after my discovery, and I knew within 5 minutes that this woman was going to change everything. Honey, she said, stirring sugar into her coffee, in 30 years of legal work, I've seen every trick in the book. What you're describing sounds like a classic family fraud case. The November morning was crisp, and steam rose from our cups like incense. I'd driven 2 hours to meet this stranger, bringing a box of documents that represented my entire life. Margaret examined each paper with the focus of a surgeon. Look at this signature, she said, holding David's supposed will up to the light. See how the D in David has that little flourish? Now look at this insurance document from last month. She placed them side by side. Different pen pressure. Different angle. Someone tried to copy your husband's signature, but they missed the subtle details. My heart started racing. Margaret's fingers moved across the documents like she was reading Braille, finding flaws invisible to my untrained eyes. Her intensity reminded me of something I'd almost forgotten, what it felt like to be truly seen and understood. The question is, Margaret continued, what was your husband really planning? Men don't usually change their wills without telling their wives, especially after 35 years of marriage. I told her about David's recent behavior. How he'd been secretive about phone calls. How he'd mentioned wanting to make some changes to our financial planning. How he'd seemed excited about something he wouldn't share. Margaret, I whispered, what if there's another will? What if David did leave me everything, and my daughters somehow got their hands on it? She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspirator's whisper. Honey, I've seen this exact forgery technique before. Professional job, but not perfect. We're going to need digital help. Margaret's gaze held mine across the table, and for the first time in months, I felt something other than grief and confusion. I felt alive. This woman believed me. More than that, she was ready to fight with me. There's a young man in Atlanta, she said, pulling out her phone. Jake Morrison. He specializes in digital forensics for estate cases. If there's electronic evidence of tampering, he'll find it. As I watched Margaret dial the number, I realized I was no longer the invisible widow everyone expected me to be. I was becoming someone else, someone who wouldn't go quietly into the night. How far would you go to prove your worth to people who've written you off? Comment below, because what we discovered next would change the game completely. Jake Morrison was 28 years old with gentle hands and the kind of sharp mind that could dissect digital lies like a pathologist examining evidence. His Atlanta lab looked like something from a sci-fi movie, walls covered with monitors, cables snaking across the floor, and computers humming secrets into the darkness. Mrs. Patterson, he said, connecting David's laptop to his system, digital documents leave footprints. Even when people think they've covered their tracks. I sat beside him, watching lines of code scroll across multiple screens. The basement lab smelled like coffee and determination. Jake's fingers moved across the keyboard like a pianist playing a complex symphony. "Here's what's interesting," he said, pulling up a timeline. "Your husband's computer shows extensive activity on November 8th and 9th, 3 days before he died. He was drafting emails, researching trust amendments, and accessing legal document templates." My breath caught. "What kind of emails?" Jake clicked through a series of files. "Draft emails to his lawyer. Look at this one, Henderson, I need to schedule an appointment immediately. Donna needs to be protected, and I've made some decisions about the girls that I should have made years ago." The email was never sent. David had saved it as a draft, probably planning to call instead of writing. But the intent was crystal clear. "There's more," Jake continued, his voice getting excited. "Your husband downloaded a trust amendment template on November 9th. He filled out most of the fields, naming you as the primary beneficiary of everything, including the lake property." Jake's fingers brushed mine as he showed me the screen, and I felt a jolt of electricity that had nothing to do with the computers around us. For a moment, I remembered what it felt like to be noticed as a woman, not just as a grieving widow. "The amendment was never finalized," he explained, "but the draft shows his clear intentions. Your daughters would have had access to his laptop after the funeral. They could have seen these drafts and decided to create their own version of reality." I stared at the screen, seeing my husband's words in digital black and white. "Donna has given me everything. She deserves everything in return. Can you prove the will they presented was created after his death?" I asked. Jake grinned. "Mrs. Patterson, not only can I prove when it was created, I can tell you which computer was used, what software generated it, and probably what the person who made it had for breakfast that day." The evidence was building like a storm. David had been planning to change everything. My daughters had found his drafts and decided to write their own ending to our story. "Jake," I said, my voice stronger than it had been in months, "I need you to find me everything. Every deleted file, every hidden document, every digital breadcrumb they left behind." He nodded, his eyes serious. "Consider it done. But Mrs. Patterson, are you ready for what we might find? Because once we open this door, there's no going back." I thought about 35 years of being the good wife, the supportive mother, the woman who never made waves. Then I thought about David's voice whispering my name in the dark, promising me a future we'd never get to share. "I'm ready," I said. "What would you do if you discovered your children had stolen your future? Let me know in the comments, because what Jake found next would blow this case wide open." Back home in Franklin, I turned my dining room into a war zone. Every surface was covered with documents, photographs, and printouts from Jake's digital investigation. The afternoon light filtered through my lace curtains, casting shadows across 35 years of financial records. I found David's insurance file first. 3 beneficiary change forms, all dated within the last 6 months of his life. Each one removed Rebecca and Jennifer as beneficiaries and named me as the sole recipient of his life insurance policy. The notarized signatures were unmistakably his. I'd watched him sign documents enough times to know every curve of his handwriting. Then came the bank statements. David had been moving money around in ways I'd never seen before. Small transfers, but consistent. He was building something, planning something, and he was doing it quietly. My hands trembled as I opened the box that had been sitting in our bedroom closet since the funeral. Inside were love letters David had written but never given me. Letters describing his desire for our retirement years, his plans for romantic trips to the lake house, and his regret that he'd let our daughters become so cold toward me. "Donna," one letter read, "I should have stood up for you years ago. The girls treat you like hired help instead of their mother. That changes now. Everything I have is yours. You earned it by loving me when loving me wasn't easy." The notarized trust amendment lay at the bottom of the box, dated 1 week before his death. My name was written in David's careful script as the primary beneficiary of everything. The lake property, the house, the investments, all of it protected in a legal trust that my daughters couldn't touch. I called Margaret immediately. "I found it," I said, my voice shaking. "The real trust amendment. David protected me. Bring it to Memphis tomorrow, she said. And Donna? Start copying everything. Make multiple sets. If your daughters find out what you have, they might try to destroy the evidence. That evening, I sat at David's desk and read every love letter he'd written. His words painted pictures of lazy mornings at the lake, evening walks holding hands, and quiet conversations about growing old together. He'd seen me as more than just his wife, he'd seen me as his partner, his equal, his greatest treasure. The last letter was different. Donna, if something happens to me, remember that you're stronger than anyone knows. Don't let them make you invisible. Fight for what's yours. It was like he'd known. Like he'd seen the betrayal coming and left me a roadmap to justice. Have you ever found love letters that changed everything you thought you knew? Share your story below, because what I discovered about my daughter's desperation was about to get much darker. I called Rebecca first. My hands were steady as I dialed her Chicago number, the trust amendment spread across my kitchen table like evidence at a crime scene. Mom? Her voice was surprised. She hadn't expected to hear from me so soon after the will reading. Rebecca, we need to talk. You and Jennifer. Conference call. Now. Mom, if this is about the will. It's about the trust amendment your father signed a week before he died. The one that names me as the primary beneficiary of everything. The silence lasted exactly 15 seconds. I counted. I don't know what you're talking about, she said, but her voice had changed. Gone was the confident daughter who'd sat stone-faced in the lawyer's office. This was the voice of someone caught red-handed. Jennifer joined the call from Dallas, her usual businesslike tone immediately defensive. Mom, you're upset. You're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in months, I said, transforming my kitchen table into a courtroom. Jake Morrison from Atlanta ran a full digital analysis of your father's computer. We found the draft emails he never sent. The ones where he talks about protecting me from you too. The line went dead quiet again. I could almost hear their hearts pounding through the phone. We found the insurance beneficiary changes, I continued. All 3 of them. Dated and notarized. And the bank records showing your father moving money into accounts you couldn't access. Mom, Rebecca's voice cracked, you don't understand. Dad was getting forgetful. He wasn't thinking straight those last few months. Lies. All lies. David's mind had been sharp as a tack until the day he died. He'd been completing crossword puzzles and balancing checkbooks right up to the end. When I mentioned the metadata, the line went silent for 30 seconds too long, I told them. 30 seconds of panic because you realized I knew the truth. Jennifer finally spoke, her lawyer training kicking in. Even if Dad made some changes, the will we presented is legally binding. You signed the acknowledgement. I signed an acknowledgement of a forged document, I shot back. Jake has proof that your version was created 3 days after the funeral. 3 days after we buried your father. The conference call crackled with tension. These were my daughters, the babies I'd rocked to sleep and the women I'd supported through every crisis. Now they were my enemies, cornered and dangerous. What do you want, Mom? Rebecca asked, defeat creeping into her voice. I want the truth. I want to know why you tried to erase me. And I want to know what debts you're hiding that made you desperate enough to steal from your own mother. Should family loyalty override justice? What would you choose? Comment below, because their answer to my question revealed just how far they'd fallen. Mr. Henderson's office felt different the second time around. Same mahogany table, same rain-streaked windows, but now I sat with my spine straight and my voice steady. I wasn't the grieving widow anymore. I was a woman with evidence. Mrs. Patterson, Henderson said, adjusting his tie nervously, I understand you have some concerns about your husband's will. I placed the trust amendment on the table between us. I have proof that David changed his estate plan a week before he died. This document supersedes anything else. Henderson's eyes widened as he read the notarized amendment. His face went pale, then flushed red. He was either the world's best actor or genuinely shocked by what he was seeing. "Where did you find this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "In my husband's personal files. The same place he kept everything else important." I leaned forward, studying his reaction. "The question is, Mr. Henderson, did you know about this when you read that fake will to my daughters and me?" "Fake will?" He looked genuinely confused. "Mrs. Patterson, your daughters brought me that document. They said it was found in your husband's home office safe." The pieces started clicking together. Henderson wasn't the mastermind, he was just another victim of my daughter's deception. They'd played him the same way they'd tried to play me. "Mr. Henderson," I said, pulling out Jake's digital analysis, "the will you read was created on a computer 3 days after David's funeral. My daughters fed you a forgery." He studied the metadata report, his hands shaking slightly. 30 years of legal practice, and he'd been fooled by 2 desperate women with computer skills and no conscience. "This is..." he started, then stopped. "Mrs. Patterson, if what you're saying is true, I've been party to a fraud. I could lose my license. Or," I said, letting the word hang in the air, "you could help me make this right." Henderson stood up and walked to his window, staring out at the Nashville traffic below. When he turned back, he was a different man, not the confident lawyer from before, but someone who just realized he'd been used. "What do you need from me?" he asked. "I need you to file the Real Trust Amendment with the court. I need you to petition for an investigation into the forged will. And I need you to do it before my daughters realize their game is over." He nodded slowly. "Mrs. Patterson, I have to ask, why are you giving me a chance to make this right? You could report me to the Bar Association right now." I thought about David's letters, about his belief that most people were good underneath their mistakes. "Because everyone deserves a chance to do the right thing, Mr. Henderson. Even lawyers." He offered me $50,000 to avoid costly litigation, confirming I was onto something big. But I wasn't interested in hush money. I wanted justice, and I wanted the truth to come out in a way that would make my daughters face what they'd done. Have you ever given someone a second chance when they didn't deserve it? Tell me about it in the comments, because what happened next would test everyone's character. The lake house in Kentucky felt like a sanctuary at midnight. Moonlight danced across the water where David and I had planned to spend our golden years, and I spread the documents across the wooden dock like I was preparing for battle. The property deed was in David's handwriting, with a note on the back, "For Donna, who made every house a home." He'd bought this place as a surprise for our 30th anniversary, telling me he wanted somewhere we could escape when the world got too heavy. I stripped down to my underwear and slipped into the cold lake water, feeling the shock of it against my skin. For the first time in months, I felt truly alive. The water held me like David's arms used to, and I floated on my back, staring up at stars that seemed brighter than they had when I was married. Swimming naked under starlight, I reclaimed something I'd lost. My sense of self as more than just someone's wife and mother. I was Donna Patterson, and I was worth fighting for. Back on the dock, wrapped in David's old fishing jacket, I called Jake at midnight. Some truths can't wait for morning. "Mrs. Patterson? Is everything okay?" "Jake, I need to know, do we have enough evidence to file criminal charges?" The pause lasted long enough for me to count 5 ripples spreading across the moonlit water. "We have enough to prove fraud," he said carefully. "Whether the DA will prosecute depends on how far your daughters went to cover their tracks." I told him about Henderson's confession, about the fake safe story, about Rebecca and Jennifer's panicked reactions during our conference call. "That changes things," Jake said, his voice getting excited. "If they lied to the lawyer about finding the will in a safe, that's conspiracy. If they destroyed your husband's real will, that's tampering with evidence. Mrs. Patterson, your daughters didn't just forge a document, they committed multiple felonies." The weight of it hit me like a wave. My own children were criminals. They'd stolen my future and gambled their freedom on the chance that I'd be too weak to fight back. "There's something else," Jake continued. "I've been digging into their financial records. Rebecca has gambling debts in Chicago. Jennifer's law practice is hemorrhaging money in Dallas. They weren't just greedy, Mrs. Patterson, they were desperate. I thought about the expensive suits they'd worn to the will reading, the jewelry Jennifer had been flashing, the casual way they discussed dividing up my life. It had all been an act, performed by two women drowning in their own bad choices. The lake lapped gently against the dock, and I made a decision that would change everything. Jake, I want to file criminal charges. And I want to do it before they have time to run. Have you ever found strength you didn't know you had? Tell us about it in the comments, because what Margaret brought me the next morning would blow this case wide open. Margaret arrived at the lake house the next morning with coffee, pastries, and a file folder that would change my life forever. She'd driven 3 hours from Memphis, and her steel-gray hair was perfect despite the early hour. "Honey," she said, settling into one of David's old fishing chairs, "I've got news that's going to knock your socks off." We set up our war room on the screened porch, spreading documents across the picnic table David had built with his own hands. Margaret's organizational skills turned chaos into order, creating timelines and evidence chains that would make prosecutors weep with joy. "Your daughters made a crucial mistake," she said, opening the mysterious folder. "They got greedy." Inside were bank records, credit reports, and financial statements that painted a picture of two women in serious financial trouble. Rebecca owed $43,000 to various casinos in Illinois and Nevada. Jennifer's law practice was 3 months behind on rent, and she'd been borrowing from client trust funds to stay afloat. "They didn't just want your inheritance," Margaret continued, "they needed it to save themselves from bankruptcy and criminal charges." Her hand lingered on my shoulder as she explained the evidence, and I felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the morning sun streaming through the screens. Margaret's strength and intelligence were attractive in ways I was just beginning to understand. "There's more," she said, pulling out a stack of emails. "Jennifer has been corresponding with a bankruptcy attorney in Dallas. She was planning to file Chapter 7 protection the week after your husband's funeral. But then she discovered his estate planning drafts on his computer. The timeline was becoming clear. David dies. The girls find his computer and discover his plans to change everything in my favor. They panic, create a fake will, and present it as legitimate to save their own financial skins." "Margaret," I said, studying her profile as she organized documents, "what happens to them if we press criminal charges?" "Conspiracy, fraud, forgery, we're looking at federal charges, Donna. Your daughters could be facing serious prison time." The weight of it settled over me like a blanket. These were the babies I'd nursed through fevers and helped with homework. Now I held their futures in my hands. "But here's the thing," Margaret said, turning to face me directly. "They made this choice. They looked at their mother, a woman who'd sacrificed everything for their family, and decided she was expendable. That tells you everything you need to know about who they really are." Her intensity was magnetic. Margaret saw the world in clear blacks and whites, no gray areas for family loyalty or misguided love. She was exactly what I needed, someone who wouldn't let me make excuses for people who'd tried to destroy me. "What would you do in my place?" I asked. Margaret's smile was fierce. "I'd make sure they understood that underestimating me was the biggest mistake they ever made. Have you ever had someone believe in you when you didn't believe in yourself? Share your thoughts below, because our next move would determine whether justice or mercy would win the day." My daughters hired the most expensive legal team in Nashville within 24 hours of learning I had evidence. Johnson, Kravitz and Associates, the kind of firm that defended politicians and CEOs when their worlds fell apart. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, choosing what to wear for the preliminary hearing. The red dress hanging in my closet called to me, the one David had bought for our last anniversary. He'd said it made me look like the woman he fell in love with 35 years ago. Today, I needed to feel that power. The courthouse steps were slick with morning dew as Margaret and I walked toward what might be the most important hour of my life. My daughters stood with their lawyers near the front entrance, looking like defendants instead of grieving family members. Rebecca had lost weight. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her hands shook as she clutched her purse. Jennifer maintained her lawyer composure, but I caught her glancing at me with something that looked almost like fear. "Mrs. Patterson," called the lead attorney, a man whose suit probably cost more than my monthly pension. "Perhaps we could discuss a settlement before we involve the courts." "No settlements," I replied, my voice carrying across the courthouse steps. "We're going to let a judge examine the evidence." Inside the courtroom, I felt David's presence like a warm hand on my back. The red dress made me stand taller, and I could feel eyes following me as I took my seat. For the first time in years, I felt beautiful and powerful and completely alive. Judge Martinez was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who'd built her career on cutting through legal nonsense. She examined our evidence with the focus of a surgeon, asking pointed questions that made the expensive lawyers squirm. "Your Honor," Margaret said, presenting the trust amendment, "this document clearly establishes Mrs. Patterson as the intended beneficiary of her husband's estate. The will presented by the defendants was created after Mr. Patterson's death and represents a deliberate attempt to defraud the rightful heir." The judge studied Jake's digital analysis, her expression growing more serious with each page. When she looked up at my daughters, her eyes were cold. "Ms. Patterson and Ms. Patterson," she said, addressing Rebecca and Jennifer formally, "the evidence presented suggests serious criminal activity. I'm referring this matter to the district attorney's office for investigation." Rebecca started crying. Not the gentle tears of grief, but the ugly sobs of someone whose world was collapsing. Jennifer maintained her composure, but her face had gone white as bone. "Furthermore," Judge Martinez continued, "I'm granting Mrs. Patterson's petition to freeze all assets from the estate pending the outcome of the criminal investigation." The gavel fell like thunder. In one moment, everything changed. The house was mine again. The lake property was mine. The bank accounts were mine. Justice had spoken, and it spoke in my favor. But as we left the courthouse, Margaret put her hand on my arm. "Honey, this is just the beginning. Your daughters aren't going to give up without a fight." "What's the most powerful moment you've ever experienced in standing up for yourself? Tell me in the comments, because what we discovered about my daughters next would shock everyone in that courtroom." The private investigator Margaret hired was a woman named Carmen Rodriguez. 53 years old with knowing eyes and hands that could uncover secrets buried deeper than graves. We met at her office in downtown Nashville, where she spread photographs across her desk like a poker player revealing a winning hand. "Your daughters have been busy," Carmen said, lighting a cigarette despite the no-smoking sign on her wall. "Rebecca's gambling problem is worse than we thought. She owes money to people who don't accept late payments." The photographs showed Rebecca entering high-stakes poker games in back rooms of Chicago restaurants. Jennifer meeting with loan sharks in Dallas parking garages. My daughters had been living double lives, funded by desperation and poor choices. "Jennifer's law practice is a shell game," Carmen continued, tapping ash into a coffee cup. "She's been moving client money around to cover Rebecca's debts. Both sisters are looking at disbarment, bankruptcy, and possibly broken legs if they don't pay up soon." I studied the images of my children, women I no longer recognized. Rebecca looked hollow, like she'd aged 10 years in 10 months. Jennifer's professional mask was slipping, revealing the panic underneath. "They didn't just want your inheritance," Carmen said, meeting my eyes with the kind of direct gaze that cuts through pretense. "They needed it to survive. Without that money, Rebecca was going to disappear, and Jennifer was going to lose everything she'd worked for." The private investigator leaned back in her chair, and I found myself noticing the strength in her shoulders, the confidence in her posture. There was something magnetic about women who'd learned to navigate the world on their own terms. "Mrs. Patterson," Carmen said, "there's something else you need to know. Your daughters have been planning to contest your evidence. They're claiming you coerced your husband into changing his will, that he was mentally incompetent in his final months." My blood turned to ice. David was sharp as a tack until the day he died. I know. But desperate people tell desperate lies. Carmen stubbed out her cigarette and leaned forward. "They're going to drag your marriage through the mud. They're going to paint you as a manipulative wife who took advantage of a sick old man." The audacity took my breath away. These women had forged documents, lied to lawyers, and stolen my future, and now they wanted to destroy David's memory to save themselves. What do we do? I asked. Carmen's smile was sharp as a blade. We prove that your daughters are liars, thieves, and gamblers who would throw their own mother under the bus to save their worthless skins. They didn't just want my inheritance, they needed it to save themselves. But now the stakes had changed, and I wasn't playing defense anymore. How far would you go to protect your loved one's memory from people trying to destroy it? Share your thoughts below, because what we uncovered next would end this war once and for all. Jake's laboratory felt different when I arrived for what we both knew would be the last piece of the puzzle. The screens glowed with enhanced audio files, and his excitement filled the room like electricity before a storm. Mrs. Patterson, he said, his fingers dancing across the keyboard, I found something that changes everything. Your husband made a phone call to his lawyer 3 days before he died. The call was recorded on Henderson's office system. My heart stopped. What did he say? Jake pressed play, and David's voice filled the room, strong, clear, and heartbreakingly familiar. I hadn't heard his voice since the morning he died, and it hit me like a physical blow. Henderson, I need to schedule an appointment immediately, David's recorded voice said. I've made some decisions about my estate that can't wait. What kind of decisions, Mr. Patterson? Henderson's voice responded. I'm removing my daughters as beneficiaries. Everything goes to Donna now. She's given me everything, her youth, her dreams, her whole life. She deserves everything in return. I started crying before David's next words, but I forced myself to listen. The girls have become cold, Henderson. They treat their mother like hired help instead of the woman who raised them. I won't reward that behavior with my death. Jake's hand covered mine as David's voice continued, explaining his plans for the trust amendment, his desire to protect me from what he already suspected his daughters might try. My biggest regret, David said, his voice breaking slightly, is that I didn't stand up for Donna sooner. She's been invisible in her own family for too long. That ends now. The recording continued with David scheduling the appointment to formalize the changes, the appointment he never made because his heart stopped first. There's more, Jake said softly. Listen to this part. David's voice grew stronger, more determined. Henderson, if something happens to me before we can meet, make sure Donna knows she was my everything. Make sure she knows I saw her, I valued her, and I loved her more at 62 than I did at 27. The laboratory fell silent except for the hum of computers. David's words hung in the air like a benediction, like a love letter delivered from beyond the grave. Jake, I whispered, this recording proves everything. His mental state, his intentions, his love for me. It proves your daughters lied about him being confused or manipulated, Jake agreed. This is the voice of a man making clear-headed decisions about his legacy. I thought about the forged will, about Rebecca and Jennifer sitting stone-faced while a lawyer read words that erased me. They'd known about this recording. They'd known Henderson had it, and they'd gambled that I'd never find it. What happens now? I asked. Jake's smile was triumphant. Now we bury them with the truth. Hearing David speak my name with such love and determination gave me strength I didn't know I still had. My husband had seen me, had valued me, had fought for me even in his final days. What's the most powerful evidence you've ever discovered about someone's true feelings? Comment below, because this recording would change everything in that courtroom. The courtroom was packed on the morning of the final hearing. Word had spread through Franklin's social circles about the Patterson family drama, and everyone wanted to see how the story would end. I wore the red dress again, but this time it felt like armor. Rebecca and Jennifer sat with their expensive lawyers at the defendant's table, but the fight had gone out of them. Rebecca's hands shook as she signed documents. Jennifer stared at the floor, unable to meet my eyes. Judge Martinez called the court to order, and Margaret stood to present our evidence. She moved like a general commanding troops, each document a weapon in our war for justice. Your Honor, Margaret began, we have definitive proof that the defendants forged their father's will, lied to legal counsel, and attempted to defraud their mother of her rightful inheritance. She played David's recorded phone call first. His voice filled the courtroom, strong and clear and full of love for me. I watched my daughters' faces crumble as their father spoke from beyond the grave, exposing their lies with his own words. "Everything goes to Donna," David's voice echoed through the silent room. "She deserves everything in return." Rebecca started crying, ugly, desperate sobs that shook her whole body. Jennifer maintained her lawyer composure, but tears streamed down her cheeks as she listened to the father she'd betrayed. Furthermore, Margaret continued, presenting Jake's digital analysis. "We have metadata proving the will presented by the defendants was created after Mr. Patterson's death. This document shows deliberate forgery with intent to commit fraud." The prosecutor stood next, announcing criminal charges against both daughters. Conspiracy, fraud, forgery, elder abuse. The words hit the courtroom like hammer blows. Judge Martinez examined each piece of evidence with the precision of a surgeon. When she looked up at my daughters, her expression was carved from stone. "Ms. Rebecca Patterson and Ms. Jennifer Patterson," she said formally, "you have betrayed not only your mother, but the memory of your father and the integrity of this legal system." The gavel fell with finality. The will is declared fraudulent and void. The trust amendment naming Mrs. Donna Patterson as sole beneficiary is hereby validated and enforced. Victory tasted like tears and triumph mixed together. The house was mine. The lake property was mine. David's love and protection had reached across death itself to save me. But as the courtroom emptied, I felt no joy in my daughter's destruction. They'd made their choices, and now they'd face the consequences. Rebecca would likely go to prison. Jennifer would lose her law license and probably serve time as well. Justice had been served, but it came with a price that would echo through what was left of our family forever. Have you ever won a battle that cost you everything you thought you wanted to save? Tell me about it, because watching my daughters face their reckoning broke my heart even as it set me free. The house felt different after the trial, larger somehow, but also emptier. I walked through rooms that had held 35 years of family memories, packing my daughters' childhood belongings into boxes they'd probably never come to claim. Rebecca's teddy bear collection sat on her old dresser, dusty reminders of the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. Jennifer's debate team trophies lined the bookshelf, evidence of the brilliant young woman who'd once made me so proud. Where had I gone wrong? When had love turned to entitlement, and gratitude become resentment? The doorbell rang as I folded Rebecca's old prom dress, the blue one we'd spent weeks shopping for, the one that made her feel like a princess. I expected it to be Margaret with legal documents or Jake with final reports. Instead, I found both daughters on my front porch. Rebecca looked broken. Prison was still months away, pending appeals, but the weight of her choices had already destroyed her. Jennifer stood straighter, but her eyes were hollow, the look of someone who'd lost everything that defined her. "Mom," Rebecca started, then stopped. "What do you say to someone you tried to erase from existence?" "We came to apologize," Jennifer said, her lawyer training helping her find words when emotions failed. "Not because the courts ordered it, but because we need you to know we're sorry." I studied their faces, looking for traces of the babies I'd rocked to sleep, the children I'd cheered at soccer games, the women I'd supported through divorces and career changes. "Why?" I asked. The simplest question, but the hardest to answer. Rebecca broke down completely. "I was drowning, Mom. The gambling, the debts, the threats. I couldn't see past my own panic. And I was scared," Jennifer added. "My practice was failing, my reputation was crumbling. We thought taking Dad's inheritance would save us both. By destroying me," I said quietly. They had no answer for that. "How do you explain sacrificing your mother's dignity for your own survival?" "We never meant for it to go this far," Rebecca whispered. "We thought you'd just accept it and move on." The honest truth was worse than their lies. They'd counted on my weakness, my history of staying quiet and keeping peace. They'd gambled that love would make me complicit in my own erasure. The doorbell rang again. Margaret stood there with champagne and flowers, her steel-gray hair perfect and her smile warm with victory. "Ladies," she said, nodding politely to my daughters, "I hope you're here to make amends." Rebecca and Jennifer left without another word, understanding that some betrayals can't be forgiven with apologies. I watched them drive away, knowing it might be the last time I saw them as free women. Margaret stepped into my hallway, and for the first time in months, the house felt less empty. "How are you holding up?" she asked, setting the champagne on my kitchen table. "I'm still standing," I said. "That's something." She moved closer, and I caught the scent of her perfume, something subtle and expensive that made me think of second chances and new beginnings. "Donna," she said softly, "what happens now? What does forgiveness look like when the people who hurt you are your own children?" Share your thoughts below, because my answer to Margaret's question would surprise us both. 6 months later, the lake house had been transformed from a retirement dream into something better, a sanctuary for new beginnings. Margaret and I had spent weeks renovating, painting walls that held old memories and creating spaces for whatever came next. The dock where I'd once sat alone with legal documents now hosted dinner parties. Carmen Rodriguez came by on weekends, teaching me to play poker and sharing stories from her investigator days. Jake visited monthly, helping me set up a digital library for David's photographs and videos. But it was Margaret who'd become my constant companion, my partner in this unexpected chapter of life. "Are you ready for this?" she asked, adjusting my collar as we prepared for the dedication ceremony. The David Patterson Memorial Scholarship for Adult Learners was being announced today at the local community college. All the money my daughters had tried to steal was going to help other women restart their lives after loss or betrayal. "He would have loved this," I said, thinking about David's belief in second chances and new dreams. Margaret's hands lingered on my shoulders, and I leaned into her touch. What had started as professional respect had grown into something deeper, love that came not from need or convenience, but from genuine admiration and shared battles. The ceremony was small but perfect. 50 women attended, all of them starting over in their own ways. Single mothers pursuing nursing degrees. Divorced wives learning computer skills. Widows like me discovering they had more to offer the world than they'd ever imagined. "Mrs. Patterson," the college president said, "would you like to say a few words?" I stood before the group, wearing a navy dress Margaret had helped me choose, sophisticated but approachable, confident but kind. 6 months ago, I began, I thought my story was over. My husband had died, my children had betrayed me, and I felt invisible in my own life. The women nodded, recognizing their own struggles in my words. But I learned something important. Being invisible was a choice, and I chose to be seen. I told them about the legal battle, about finding strength in unexpected places, about the friends who'd helped me fight for justice. I told them about David's love reaching across death itself to protect me. The money funding these scholarships came from betrayal and lies, I said. But we're transforming it into hope and opportunity. That's what strong women do, we take the worst things that happen to us and make them into something beautiful. The applause was warm and genuine. After the ceremony, women approached me with their own stories of survival and reinvention. I exchanged phone numbers, made lunch dates, and realized I'd found my new purpose. That evening, Margaret and I sat on the dock where this whole journey had begun. The sun set over water that reflected our joined hands, and I marveled at how life could surprise you with gifts you'd never thought to ask for. "Any regrets?" Margaret asked, her gray eyes serious in the twilight. I thought about my daughters, facing prison terms and professional ruin. I thought about the family dinners that would never happen, the grandchildren I might never meet, the relationships that betrayal had made impossible. "I regret that it came to this," I said honestly. "But I don't regret fighting for myself." Margaret leaned over and kissed me, soft and sweet and full of promise for whatever came next. Mature love, built on respect and shared strength rather than need and desperation. The door had opened again, but this time it wasn't a return to the past. It was the start of something entirely new. I was no longer just a spectator in my life. I was the one who chose the story, and I was writing the best chapter yet. Thanks for staying with me through this incredible journey of betrayal, justice, and unexpected love. If Donna's story inspired you to fight for what's rightfully yours, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that will make you feel, think, and maybe even heal a little. Tell me in the comments, what aspect of Donna's transformation resonated most with you? Was it finding the courage to investigate? Standing up to family members? Discovering love when she least expected it? And remember, the most powerful revenge isn't destroying the people who hurt you, it's becoming someone they can't destroy. Sometimes the quiet ones are the most dangerous, because we've been watching, learning, and preparing for the moment when silence becomes strength. If you know someone who's been made to feel invisible in their own life, share this story with them. Sometimes we all need a reminder that it's never too late to choose ourselves, to demand better, and to transform our deepest betrayals into our greatest victories. What does it take for someone to truly reclaim their power? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that prove the strongest people aren't those who never fall, they're the ones who get back up and refuse to stay down. Until next time, remember, you're never too old to rewrite your story, and you're never too quiet to make some noise when it matters most.